Everyone keeps saying I'm fine, that I'm strong, independent, that I've got everything handled. And that's exactly when people stopped asking if I was okay. In a small town out west, when you're labeled the strong one, it quietly gives everyone permission to step back, to stop protecting you, to stop noticing when you're carrying too much. So here's the real question. When adults walk away because you're grown enough, who takes responsibility when you finally break stay with me? If this hits close to home, like the video, share it, and subscribe for stories that tell the truth out loud. People like to say Elena Carter had it together. That was the phrase they used. She's got it together. She paid her own bills. She didn't ask for help. She didn't complain. In a town like ours, that counted as proof. I learned early that being capable made people comfortable. If I showed up on time, handled problems quietly, and didn't fall apart in public, no one worried about me. They assumed that meant I didn't need anything. That wasn't a decision I made. It was something that happened gradually, without asking. I didn't wake up one day and decide to be independent. I adapted, one responsibility at a time. First, it was small things, covering a gap, handling a bill when someone else couldn't, making sure nothing shut off, nothing bounced, nothing looked wrong from the outside. Each time I stepped in, someone stepped back. At first, I thought that was what growing up looked like. You see a problem, you fix it. You don't make it bigger by talking about how heavy it feels. When people thanked me, it felt strange. When they stopped noticing, it felt normal. That's how it works when self-reliance isn't praised out loud, but quietly expected. I was the one people called when something went wrong, and I was the one they stopped checking on because I always answered. No one ever said, "You shouldn't have to carry this." They said, "You're so strong." And strength, I learned, was a very convenient excuse for absence. There's a misunderstanding people have about endurance. They think the ones who last the longest are the ones who feel the least. That's not true. The people who endure the most are usually the ones who feel deeply, but learned early that leaving would make them the villain. They stay not because they're weak, but because they were taught that walking away makes them selfish. I didn't stay because I didn't see what was happening. I stayed because every time I imagined stopping, a different fear showed up. What if I'm the reason everything falls apart? What if I prove everyone right about me being cold, ungrateful, dramatic? Those questions don't come from nowhere. They're planted. When love is given with conditions, your nervous system learns to pay a toll. Be helpful, be quiet, be reliable. Pain becomes the entry fee for belonging. So when something hurts, your first instinct isn't to leave. It's to look inward and ask what you did wrong. I didn't think of myself as trapped. I thought of myself as responsible. That word followed me everywhere. Responsible enough to manage things no one else wanted to look at. Responsible enough not to rock the boat. Responsible enough to absorb stress so it didn't spread. People called that maturity. But there's a difference between growing up and being left alone. In a lot of families, there's a moment no one talks about. The moment you're no longer a child, but not truly protected as an adult either. That's when the language shifts. You're old enough now. You understand. You can handle it. Those phrases sound like trust, but often they're permission. Permission for the people around you to step back. Permission to stop explaining. Permission to stop showing up emotionally. When a child learns to cope too early, adults mistake that survival skill for readiness. They see calm and assume capacity. They see silence and assume consent. I became the one who's fine. Once that label sticks, it's hard to remove. No one asks if you're tired. They ask if you're free. No one checks whether you're overwhelmed. They just hand you one more thing. And because you've carried everything before, refusing feels like betrayal. I didn't announce that I was struggling. I didn't collapse dramatically. I just got quieter. I noticed how often conversations ended with relief instead of concern. How quickly people moved on once I said, "I'll take care of it." That should have been a warning sign, but it felt like normal life. That's the part people don't see. Self-reliance can look identical to being abandoned. From the outside, it looks admirable. From the inside, it feels lonely. I didn't feel heroic. I felt necessary. And necessity is a dangerous role to live in for too long. Because when you're needed, but not protected, you become invisible in a very specific way. People see what you provide, not what it costs. No one asked me how long I could keep going. They just assumed I would. There were days I came home exhausted, not from work, but from holding everything together. Days where the quiet felt heavier than noise. I told myself this was temporary, that once things stabilized, someone else would step up. But stability became the reason nothing changed. Everything was working, at least on paper. That's the lie of functional pain. If it doesn't disrupt the system doesn't care. I didn't need rescuing. I needed someone to notice. But when you're the strong one, noticing you would mean admitting something uncomfortable. That strength doesn't come from abundance. It comes from absence. And absence is easier to ignore than harm. So people praised my independence while benefiting from it. They called me mature while stepping further away. I didn't realize how tired I was until I stopped moving for a moment. Until I asked myself a question no one else ever did. What happens if I can't do this anymore? I didn't have an answer. That scared me, because it meant I had built a life where my exhaustion was expected. But my limits were not. That was the seed of the conflict. Even though I didn't name it yet, I just knew something was off, something unsustainable. Everyone thought I was fine. I was functioning. I was reliable. But no one asked the simplest question. Not once. Are you okay, really? People like to say I was independent. They said it the way people say a problem has already been solved. My name is Elena Carter, and for a long time, that label followed me everywhere. I lived on my own. I worked full-time. I paid my bills on time, in a town like ours. That was enough for people to stop worrying. No one ever asked how I became that way. They just assumed it was natural. Like independence was a personality trait I was born with. It wasn't. It was something I learned, quietly, out of necessity. I didn't choose to be self-reliant because it sounded empowering. I became self-reliant because there wasn't always someone else stepping in. At first, it didn't feel heavy. It felt responsible. There was a problem, so I handled it. There was a gap, so I filled it. There was a moment when someone needed help, and I was the one who could provide it. That's how it started. One small yes at a time. I told myself this was what adults did. They noticed what needed fixing and didn't make a scene about it. When people thanked me, I brushed it off. When they stopped thanking me, I didn't notice, because nothing had gone wrong yet. That's the thing about having it together. As long as everything keeps running, no one looks too closely at the cost. I learned quickly that being capable made people comfortable. If I didn't complain, no one felt guilty. If I stayed calm, no one felt responsible. So I stayed calm. I became the person who didn't need reminders, the one who followed through, the one who didn't fall apart in public. And slowly, without anyone saying it out loud, I became the one people leaned on, not emotionally, practically. If something needed handling, they called me. If something needed paying, they assumed I'd figure it out. And if something hurt, they assumed I could take it. That wasn't a role I agreed to. It was a role I grew into because no one stopped me. People confuse endurance with strength. They think the ones who last the longest are the ones who feel the least. That's not how it works. The people who endure are often the ones who feel everything, but learned early that showing it didn't help. They stay not because they're weak, but because leaving feels like failure. I didn't stay because I didn't see the pattern. I stayed because every time I imagined stepping back, a different fear showed up. What if I'm overreacting? What if I make things worse? What if I'm the reason everything falls apart? Those questions keep people in place longer than chains ever could. When you grow up being praised for being easy or low maintenance, you learn something dangerous. You learn that taking up space costs you love. So you don't. You learn to be useful instead. I didn't think of myself as trapped. I thought of myself as reliable. That word followed me everywhere. Reliable enough to manage things no one else wanted to deal with. Reliable enough not to make things awkward. Reliable enough to absorb stress so it didn't spill onto anyone else. People called that maturity. But there's a difference between growing up and being left alone. In a lot of families, there's a moment that doesn't come with an announcement. The moment when you stop being protected, but no one tells you. The language changes quietly. You're old enough now. You understand how things are. You can handle it. Those words sound like trust, but more often, they're permission. Permission for other people to step back. Permission to stop explaining. Permission to stop noticing. When a child learns to cope too early, adults mistake that survival skill for readiness. They see calm and assume capacity. They see silence and assume consent. I became the one everyone said was fine. Once that label sticks, it's hard to shake. No one checks on the person who always says yes. They just add one more thing. No one asks if you're tired. They ask if you're available, and because you've carried it before. Refusing feels wrong. It feels like letting someone down. I didn't announce that I was struggling. I didn't ask for help. I didn't collapse. I just got quieter. I noticed how often conversations ended with relief instead of concern. How quickly people moved on once I said, "I'll take care of it." That should have been a warning sign, but it felt normal. That's the part no one talks about. Self-reliance can look exactly like abandonment. From the outside, it looks admirable. From the inside, it feels isolating. I didn't feel strong, I felt necessary. And necessity is a dangerous role to live in for too long. Because when you're needed but not protected, you start to disappear. People see what you provide, not what it costs. No one asked how long I could keep going. They just assumed I would. There were nights I came home exhausted, not from work, but from holding everything together. I'd open the fridge and stare at it longer than I needed to, too tired to decide what to eat. That was the moment I knew something was wrong, not because everything was falling apart, but because everything was working, at least on the surface. That's the lie of functional pain. If it doesn't disrupt the system doesn't notice. I didn't need saving. I needed someone to ask a simple question. But when you're the strong one, asking that question would force people to face something uncomfortable, that your strength didn't come from abundance. It came from absence. And absence is easier to ignore than harm. So people praised my independence while benefiting from it. They called me mature while stepping further away. I didn't realize how tired I was until I paused long enough to feel it, until I asked myself something no one else ever did. If I stop doing this, what happens next? I didn't have an answer. And that scared me, because it meant I had built a life where my endurance was expected. But my limits were not. That realization didn't explode. It settled, quietly. And it planted the question that would change everything. Not can I keep going, but why am I the only one who is? No one asked if I was exhausted. No one checked if I was okay. They just assumed I was. And that assumption was about to cost all of us something. I didn't notice the money at first. It wasn't a big dramatic transfer. It was a phone call on a Tuesday. My mom's voice tight, like she was holding her breath. "Elena," she said, "I hate to ask, but they sent another notice." I asked what kind. She didn't answer right away. "Medical," she finally said, and then she added, quickly, "It's nothing. It's just paperwork. You know how they are." In my head, I heard the same old sentence, "You're the only one who can help." So I paid it. It didn't feel like a choice. It felt like preventing a crisis, like putting out a small fire before it spread. A few weeks later, there was another bill, then another, then a temporary payment that somehow became a regular thing. They weren't called what they were. They were always something softer. Just until next month. Just this once. Just so I can breathe. And every time I said yes, the request came a little faster next time. The first time I opened an invoice from the care facility, I stared at the number longer than I should have. It wasn't even anger. It was disbelief. I remember standing in my kitchen with the paper in my hands, the light over the stove buzzing. My dinner sat cold on the counter. My stomach felt hollow. I paid it anyway. That became the pattern. A quiet life on the outside, a constant drip on the inside. Every month, something arrived. Sometimes it was a bill. Sometimes it was a letter marked past due. Sometimes it was an email that looked polite, but carried a threat. And always, it came with a phone call. My mom didn't ask like a person who needed help. She asked like a person collecting something she was owed. If I hesitated, she got hurt. If I asked questions, she got offended. "Why are you interrogating me?" she'd say. "Do you think I'm lying after everything I've done for you?" It was never about the money. It was about the tone. The expectation wasn't just that I would pay. It was that I would pay and still feel guilty for not doing it faster. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from funding someone else's emergencies. You don't get to plan. You don't get to relax. You live in a constant state of what's next. I started keeping a small notebook on my counter. Not because I was organized, because I was scared I would forget. Dates, amounts, account numbers, names of representatives I spoke to. I wrote them down the way people write down symptoms before a doctor's appointment. Like I needed proof that what I was living was real. But I didn't call it proof. I called it being responsible. That's how I survived it. I turned it into a task. I told myself I was helping my mom through a hard season. I told myself this was what family did. I told myself the consequences of saying no would be worse than the consequences of saying yes. I never said, "I can't." I said, "I'll figure it out." And that sentence cost me more than money. There were months I ran my own card too close to the limit. Months I skipped things I needed. Not luxuries. Needs. Groceries became careful. Gas became calculated. I knew exactly how far my tank could take me before the light came on. One night, I opened my fridge and just stood there, not because there was nothing, because everything inside felt like a decision I didn't have energy to make. When you're always covering someone else, you start living like your own life is optional. And the strangest part was, no one saw it. In our town, my mom was known. People recognized her at the post office. They stopped her outside the diner. They called her Maggie like they'd known her forever. After her health started declining, the story around her hardened into something polished. Poor Maggie, people would say. She's so brave. She's been through so much. They said it with sincerity. They meant it. And my mom wore that story like a clean jacket. She learned how to talk about her struggles in a way that sounded humble but kept the attention on her. She learned how to accept sympathy without ever admitting to what was happening behind the scenes. And I stood beside her in public, smiling, holding her purse, nodding at the right moments. If you had seen us, you would have thought I was the lucky daughter, the devoted one, the stable one. No one looked at me and thought, she's drowning. They looked at me and thought, she's fine. Sometimes people even praised me for it. You're such a good girl. A woman at church told me once, I don't know how Maggie would make it without you. I smiled. I thanked her. I swallowed the part of me that wanted to say, you have no idea what this is doing to me, because in a town like ours, saying something like that would make me the problem. If I told the truth, I wouldn't just be revealing numbers. I'd be disrupting a story everyone liked. And that story had power. My mom didn't need to demand admiration. People handed it to her. Meanwhile, I was sending payments that didn't come with applause, just more expectations. And the power imbalance got worse. The more I paid, the more she acted like I should be grateful for the opportunity, like supporting her was proof I wasn't a failure. If I ever sounded tired on the phone, she'd laugh lightly, not because it was funny, because it reminded me to get back in line. You're young, she'd say. You can handle it. It's not like you have kids. You don't even have that much going on. She said those things like she was stating facts, like my life only counted if it looked like hers. And if I pushed back, she changed tactics. She got small. She got wounded. She got quiet. I guess I'll just figure it out. She'd say, voice trembling, I don't want to be a burden. I shouldn't have asked. Then she'd pause long enough for me to feel it, the guilt, the pressure, the familiar squeeze in my chest. And I'd say what I always said, okay, I'll take care of it. That's what the relationship became. Not mother and daughter, provider and receiver, giver and judge. I gave, and she evaluated. I handed over stability, and she handed back criticism. In public, she was so grateful. In private, I was never enough. I started to notice how often I apologized when I was the one helping. Sorry, I can't send it until Friday. Sorry, I need to check my account. Sorry, I'm asking so many questions. Why was I sorry? If you were me, would you understand that? There's a point where you realize you're not just paying bills. You're paying to keep peace. You're paying to keep a story intact. You're paying so no one has to feel uncomfortable. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. I told myself it would end, that her situation would improve, that some help would come from somewhere else. It didn't. The bills kept arriving, the requests kept coming, and the expectations kept growing. My mom didn't say, thank you. She said, you should. And every time she said it, something inside me tightened, because it wasn't about what I could afford anymore. It was about what I was allowed to be. I was allowed to be strong. I was allowed to be useful. I was allowed to be quiet. What I wasn't allowed to be was tired. No one asked if I was exhausted. Not my dad. Not my relatives. Not the people who praised me in public. They saw me functioning, and they assumed I was fine. And the worst part was, I started to assume it too. Until one day, the notification hit my phone while I was in line at the grocery store. Another charge, another amount, another just this once. My hand hovered over my screen, my heart beat once. hard. And I realized something I hadn't admitted out loud yet. This wasn't temporary. This was my life now, unless I did something that would create consequences. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that. Not yet. The fundraiser was on a Friday night in our town. That meant the whole place showed up, not because everyone wanted to give, because everyone wanted to be seen giving. The community hall sat off the main road, right past the old hardware store. The parking lot was packed, trucks lined up crooked in the dirt, headlights sweeping over people as they walked in. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and store-bought cookies, folding chairs, plastic tablecloths, a banner taped to the wall with crooked letters. I remember standing in the doorway for a second, letting my eyes adjust. It was loud in that familiar way. Small town loud. A dozen conversations happening at once, all of them overlapping. People waved when they saw me, not warmly, politely, like they were acknowledging a role I played. I walked in with my mom beside me. Maggie moved slower than she used to, but she knew exactly how to carry herself. She had on a neat cardigan, her hair brushed, lipstick just enough to look put together. She held her chin slightly higher than normal. She looked like someone who had survived something. She looked like someone people wanted to admire. And they did. As soon as we stepped inside, someone called her name. Maggie. Oh my goodness. A woman I recognized from church hurried over and took my mom's hands like she was greeting royalty. Another person came from the other side with a smile too wide. They asked how she was feeling. They asked if she needed anything. They asked if she was eating enough. I stood there, a step behind her, holding her purse, watching people lean in. No one asked how I was. That wasn't unusual. It was just clear. There was a table near the front with a clipboard and a jar for donations. A teenager sat behind it, bored, tapping a pen. Next to the jar was a poster with my mom's photo printed large, her name in bold letters, a short paragraph about her journey. I'd seen that paragraph before, not because I wrote it, because I paid for the printing. My mom smiled at the poster like it was a compliment, like it was proof. A man with a microphone tested the sound system. The speaker crackled. A child squealed somewhere near the back. Someone laughed too loudly. It all felt normal, and then it didn't. We found seats near the middle, not too close to the front, but not in the back either, close enough to be part of it. My dad was already there. Thomas Carter sat with his hands folded, posture stiff, eyes scanning the room. He stood when he saw us, leaned in to kiss my mom on the cheek, then nodded at me like we were coworkers. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied. That was the whole exchange. You could tell he was trying to look calm. In public, he always did. There were other family members too. Linda Brooks, my aunt, sat 2 rows behind us with her arms crossed. She raised her eyebrows at me, like she was checking in without saying anything. I gave her a small nod. The lights dimmed slightly. The room quieted in waves as people realized something was starting. The man with the microphone cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming," he said, smiling. He talked about community. He talked about strength. He talked about how we take care of our own. People nodded at the right moments. Then he said my mom's name. The room applauded. Not a polite clap, a real one. My mom smiled, slow and practiced. She pressed her hand to her chest like she was humbled. I watched her take it in, and I felt something in my stomach that didn't have a name. The man went on about her resilience, about how she'd faced her health challenges with grace, about what an inspiration she was. I could see heads turning toward her, faces softening, people wiping at their eyes. A woman near the front whispered, "She's so brave." My mom leaned slightly into the attention. She didn't look at me. Then the man said, "And we also want to recognize her daughter, Elena." My spine straightened without me meaning to. A few people turned to look at me. Some smiled. Some didn't. The man continued, "Elena has been such a support. Always reliable, always steady. She's one of those young women who can handle anything." He chuckled a little, like it was a compliment. "She's got her life together." He added, "She's fine." People laughed softly, like that was a familiar truth. I felt my face stay still. I felt my hands tighten in my lap, because that sentence wasn't harmless. It never was. "She's fine." That was the phrase people used when they wanted to stop looking closer. My mom turned her head, just slightly, and smiled at me. Not a warm smile. A smile with an edge, the kind that said, "See, even they know." And then, as if she couldn't resist, she leaned toward the woman beside her and said loud enough for me to hear, "Elena doesn't need help. She's too proud for that." The woman laughed. My dad didn't react. He stared forward like he was watching the microphone, not listening to the words. I swallowed. Slowly. I could feel that old instinct rise up, the one that told me to shrink, to let it go, to not make a scene, because we were in public, because people were watching, because in our town, embarrassment doesn't fade, it circulates. My mom knew that. That's why she chose moments like this, not when we were alone, when there were witnesses. The man with the microphone was still talking. He thanked the donors. He asked everyone to open their hearts. People started moving toward the donation table, bills folded in hands, checks already written. My mom stood up carefully, letting someone offer her an arm. She accepted it like it was her due. As she walked toward the front, she paused and turned back. "You coming?" she asked me. It sounded polite. It wasn't. It was a command disguised as a question. I stood and followed. The closer we got, the more eyes landed on us. People stepped aside, smiled, touched my mom's shoulder. "She's a fighter." Someone said. My mom nodded. Then, without looking at me, she added, "Some of us have to be." Her voice was light, almost playful. The words hid anyway. I looked at the donation jar. I looked at the clipboard. I looked at the little numbers people wrote next to their names. It all looked so clean, so simple, so respectable. And I thought about the mess that never made it into this room. The late-night phone calls, the invoices, the past due stamps, the notebook on my counter, the feeling of being alone with it. I thought about how easily people believed a story when it made them feel good. My mom leaned toward the teenager behind the table and said, "Make sure you spell my name right." Then she looked at me. "Can you handle the rest?" she asked, loud enough for the people around us to hear. Her tone was sweet. Her eyes weren't. I felt heat rise up my neck, because the rest was never small. The rest was always the weight she didn't want to carry. The rest was always me. Someone nearby laughed like it was a cute family moment, like we were a team. I looked at my mom's face, at the way she held herself, at the way she let people treat her like a symbol. And I realized the line had moved. This wasn't just between us anymore. This wasn't a private pattern that only hurt in the dark. This was public. This was reputation. This was a story she was selling, and I was paying for. My mouth went dry. I could have smiled and nodded like I always did. I could have played my role, but something in me shifted. Not anger, not yet. More like clarity. If you were me, standing in that room, with all those eyes and all that praise, would you have felt it too? That moment when you understand the truth isn't just being ignored, it's being used. I looked down at the clipboard again. Names, amounts, signatures, evidence. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was holding my mom's purse. I felt like I was holding a match. The only question was whether I was going to strike it, or keep pretending we were all fine. My mom's question landed soft, like it was casual. Can you handle the rest? People nearby smiled. Someone laughed like it was a sweet family thing. I didn't laugh. I looked at the clipboard again. Names, amounts, signatures, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not yet. More like the moment you realize the room is on fire and everyone's still talking. I reached into my tote and pulled out my notebook. It wasn't dramatic. It was small. A plain spiral notebook with dog-eared corners and ink smudges. I'd carried it for months, not because I wanted to expose anyone, because I didn't trust my own memory anymore. My dad noticed it first. "What's that?" he asked. Quietly. I didn't answer him right away. I set the notebook on the table next to the donation jar. Then I pulled out a thin folder. Receipts, statements, dates. My mom's smile tightened. "Elena," she said, still sweet. "What are you doing?" I kept my voice even. "I'm handling the rest," I said. The teenager behind the table stopped tapping his pen. A couple of people leaned in without meaning to. My mom's eyes flicked around the room. She was calculating. She always did that. This wasn't a kitchen conversation. This wasn't a private call she could hang up on. There were witnesses. My dad stepped closer. "Elena," he said again. "What is this?" I opened the notebook. The pages were filled with neat lines, dates on the left, amounts on the right, short notes in the margins. I didn't read it like a speech. I didn't need to. I just turned the notebook so my dad could see. His face changed in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Not anger, shock. "What is this?" he whispered. I kept my eyes on the paper. "Every bill," I said. "Every payment. Every time she called me and said it was urgent." My mom let out a laugh that didn't match her face. "Oh my God," she said, loud enough for people to hear. "Are you seriously doing this here?" It wasn't a denial. It was an accusation. That's what she did when facts were inconvenient. She didn't argue the truth. She argued the timing. My dad flipped through the folder with his hands shaking. "These are medical charges," he said. I nodded once. "And the care facility?" I added. "And the pharmacy? And the transportation service?" My mom's voice sharpened. "Thomas, don't be dramatic," she said. Elena offered. She insisted. "You know how she is. She likes to feel important." There it was. The spin. She was trying to turn my help into my flaw. I looked up at her. I didn't insist. I said, "I panicked. Because you told me it would fall apart if I didn't." A woman nearby blinked. Another person shifted their weight. Uncomfortable. My mom pressed a hand to her chest like she was wounded. "So now I'm a villain," she said. "After everything I've been through." She made her voice tremble. It was practiced. In this town, people understood tears faster than spreadsheets. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue her feelings. I reached into the folder and pulled out one statement, then another. I paid on March 12th. I said, April 9th, May 6th, June 3rd. My mom shook her head, smiling like I was embarrassing myself. "You're obsessed," she said. "You always have to keep score." I didn't flinch. "It's not score," I said. It's evidence. That word made the room quieter, because feelings can be debated. Evidence can't. My dad looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. How long, he asked. I swallowed. Long enough, I said. Long enough that I started writing it down so I wouldn't gaslight myself. My mom's eyes snapped to mine. Don't use words you saw online, she hissed under her breath, still smiling for the room. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about money. This was about control. If she could make me look unstable, the facts wouldn't matter. If she could make me look emotional, the numbers wouldn't matter. So I stayed calm, because calm was the only thing she couldn't twist. My dad turned another page. This is thousands of dollars, he said, voice cracking. My mom's face hardened for half a second. Then she softened again, switching masks. I didn't ask for all that. She said to the room, I never wanted to be a burden. I'm just trying to survive. People murmured. Some nodded. I watched it happen. The familiar pattern. She was building a story in real time, a story where her pain was the main character, where my help was optional, where my exhaustion didn't exist. So I did the one thing I'd never done before. I let the facts speak without defending myself. I tapped the notebook gently. The dates are there, I said. The amounts are there. The consequences are there. Then I looked at my mom. And tonight, I added, you called me fine in front of everyone. The room stilled. My mom opened her mouth, ready to laugh it off. But my dad spoke first. Why didn't you tell me, he asked her. She blinked. I didn't want to worry you, she said quickly. He didn't accept it. And you let her pay? He asked, gesturing toward me. My mom's voice rose. She's my daughter. She snapped. What is she supposed to do? Let her mother suffer. There it was. The final weapon. Duty. I looked at my dad, then back at the room. If you were me, standing there, would you hear how impossible that question was? Because no matter what I did, I lost. Paying made me resentful. Refusing made me cruel. That was the trap. My hands were steady on the notebook. I'm not doing this anymore. I said, quietly. My mom's smile vanished. And for the first time that night, the story in the room stopped being hers. After I said it, the room didn't explode. It went quiet in a different way, like people were holding their breath and waiting to see who would move first. My mom didn't cry right away. She didn't storm out. She stared at me, lips pressed together, like she was trying to decide which version of herself would work best in front of an audience. My dad looked like he'd been hit in the chest. Elena, he said, low. What do you mean you're not doing it anymore? I could have answered him with a speech. I didn't. I just slid the notebook back into my tote and zipped it closed. That sound was louder than it should have been. My mom's eyes narrowed. So now you're making a scene? She said, still smiling for the people around us. Congratulations. It wasn't a denial. It was a strategy. If she could make me look emotional, then the evidence would look like overreacting. If she could make me look disrespectful, then my boundaries would look like punishment. I didn't give her that. I stepped back from the table. I'm leaving, I said. My mom laughed once. Sharp. Of course you are, she said. You always run when things get hard. My chest tightened. That line had kept me in place for years. Because it wasn't just an insult. It was a trap. If I stayed, I proved I was obedient. If I left, I proved her story. My dad reached for my arm. Wait, he said. Just wait. I looked at him and saw something real there. Confusion, regret, fear. And for a second, the old part of me wanted to rescue him too, to make it easier, to explain everything carefully so he wouldn't feel responsible. But that was the role I was stepping out of. I pulled my arm back gently. I can't keep doing this, I said. Not the payments, not the pressure, not the pretending. My mom's voice rose, just enough for the room to hear. So what? She said. You're going to abandon your sick mother. That's who you are now. People shifted. Someone cleared their throat. A woman near the back whispered, "Oh my God." My mom looked pleased. She had the room where she wanted it. A simple story. Sick mother, cold daughter. That story always wins in a small town. I could have destroyed her right then. I had one last email printed in my folder. I'd kept it separate from the bills. It wasn't about money. It was her message to the facility coordinator. A friendly little note. The kind of thing people write when they want to sound responsible. It included a request. Not for better care. Not for a payment plan. For a letter. A letter praising her devotion. Something she could show at events like this. Something she could read out loud when people asked how she was holding up. I'd stared at that email the night I found it. My hands shaking. My stomach turning. Because it confirmed what my gut had been whispering for months. Some of the suffering was real, but the performance was intentional. If I read that email out loud in this room, her image would crack instantly. People would turn, the praise would stop, the sympathy would change shape. It would be clean. It would be satisfying. And it would also make me the kind of person who burns the whole place down just to prove she was right. My mom watched me closely, like she sensed I had something else. "Go on," she said, eyes shining. "Tell them what a monster I am." My fingers brushed the folder in my tote. I felt the weight of that email like a stone. This was the moment people fantasize about. The moment where you finally say everything, where you expose them, where you win. But winning like that has a cost, because once you start fighting for public approval, you're still trapped inside their world. You're still performing. You're still asking the room to choose you. I didn't want the room. I wanted my life back. So I made a different choice. I looked at my mom and kept my voice level. "I'm not here to punish you," I said. "I'm here to stop." My mom blinked, thrown off. "What does that even mean?" She snapped. It meant everything. Boundary isn't a threat. It's not revenge. It's a line you draw so you don't keep bleeding. I didn't need to embarrass her to be free. I didn't need the town to clap for me. I didn't need anyone to understand. I just needed to stop participating. I turned to my dad. "I'm not asking you to pick a side," I said. "I'm telling you what I'm doing." He opened his mouth, then closed it. My mom stepped closer, voice dropping. "You think you're better than me now?" She hissed. "You think you can just walk away and look righteous?" I met her eyes. "I think I'm tired," I said. "And I think being tired is enough of a reason." That was the truth she couldn't argue with, not without looking cruel. My mom's face tightened. She tried to laugh again, but it didn't land. She looked around the room, searching for support, for someone to jump in and shame me back into place. Some people looked away. Some stared at the donation jar like it suddenly mattered a lot. No one spoke. Not because they agreed with me, because no one wants to touch a family fracture in public. Not when it might stain them too. My mom noticed that, and her eyes went hard. "So that's it," she said, loud again. "You're leaving me." I didn't correct her. Because correcting her would have been another argument, another loop, another attempt to be understood. I picked up my tote. "I'm leaving," I repeated. "And I won't be sending money anymore." The word money hung in the air. My dad flinched. My mom's mouth opened like she was about to explode. And then she did something quieter. She smiled. A small, controlled smile. The kind that says, "I'll deal with you later." That smile used to terrify me, because it meant consequences behind closed doors. But this time, I noticed something else. For the first time, those consequences weren't automatic. They weren't guaranteed, because I was walking out, not to punish her, to protect myself. I moved toward the doors. The air outside hit my face, cold and dry. The parking lot lights buzzed. My breath came out in short clouds. My hands were shaking, not because I regretted it, because I'd never done something so simple. I'd never left. Behind me. The hall kept humming. People kept talking. Life kept moving. My mom still had her story. But I had something else. A boundary. And for once, it wasn't loud. It was final. I drove home with my hands locked on the steering wheel. The road was empty. Just the hum of tires and the occasional porch light in the distance. I kept waiting for the adrenaline to turn into relief. It didn't. It turned into something heavier. When I walked into my apartment, the silence felt loud. I set my toad on the floor. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't call anyone. I just stood there for a minute, like I needed my body to believe I was safe. Then my phone started. One text from my Aunt Linda. Just 3 words. "Are you okay?" Then another. From my dad. "Please call me." Then my mom. A long message that filled the screen. I didn't open it right away. I walked to the kitchen instead. I opened my fridge. The light came on. The same half-empty shelves. I stared at it like it could tell me what to do next. That was the part I didn't expect. I thought setting a boundary would feel like victory, like a clean ending, like the moment in movies where the music swells and the person walks away stronger. It didn't feel like that. It felt like grief, because a boundary isn't a dramatic exit. It's a quiet acceptance that something you wanted will not be given to you. I finally sat down at the table and opened my mom's message. It wasn't one message, it was several. It started with anger. "How could you do that to me?" Then it shifted to pity. "I'm sick." "Elena, I'm scared." Then it shifted to guilt. "After everything I sacrificed for you." Then the final sentence. "You've always been cold." I read it once, then again. And I felt that old instinct rise up. The instinct to defend myself, to explain, to prove I wasn't what she said I was. That's how the cycle kept going. She would accuse. I would scramble. She would win. Not because she was right, but because I was busy trying to be understood. I put my phone face down. I looked at the toad on the floor. Inside it was the folder. Inside that folder was the email. The one I didn't read out loud. The one that would have made the whole town turn on her in a heartbeat. And I won't pretend I didn't want to. If you've ever been in my position, you know that feeling, that fantasy, the perfect sentence, the perfect screenshot, the perfect moment where everyone finally sees what you've been living with. I pictured it. I pictured walking back into that hall, holding that paper up like a weapon. I pictured my mom's smile disappearing. I pictured the murmurs, the shock, the consequences. And for a second, I felt something like satisfaction. Then I pictured the next day, the way people in this town talk. Not just about her, about me. She didn't have to humiliate her like that. Even if it's true, that's her mother. She took it too far. And then the story would shift again. It always does. It would stop being about what happened and become about how I reacted. That's the trap nobody warns you about. When you're dealing with someone who thrives on control, They don't fear your pain, they fear your clarity. They don't mind being called cruel in private. They mind losing their image in public. So yes, I could have exposed her, but exposing someone isn't the same as freeing yourself. Sometimes it just keeps you tied to them, because now you're still orbiting their story. You're still spending energy on proving what they did. You're still begging the room to validate you. That night, I realized something I didn't want to admit. Part of me still wanted the room. Part of me still wanted my mom to look at me and say, "You didn't deserve that." And the hardest truth was this: I wasn't going to get it. Not from her, not in the way I wanted, not in the way a child is supposed to get it from a parent. So I had to choose. Did I want to punish her? Or did I want to protect myself? Because those are not the same thing. Punishment is about making them feel what you felt. Protection is about making sure you never feel it again. Punishment keeps you connected. Protection creates distance. And distance, in my case, wasn't cruelty. It was survival. I picked up the email from the folder and read it again, slowly, like I was forcing myself to see it clearly. It was careful, polite, strategic, and it made my stomach turn. I could still use it. I could still press send. I could still forward it to people who would spread it like wildfire. I could still turn her into the villain she'd been trying to make me. And if you're honest, there's a part of you that might say, do it, because it feels fair. But fairness isn't always healing. Sometimes fairness is just another version of being trapped, another version of spending your life responding. I thought about something my therapist once said. Not in a dramatic way, just a sentence that stuck. You don't need their confession to be free. At the time, I didn't believe it, because I wanted her to admit it. I wanted her to own it. I wanted her to feel ashamed. But that night, sitting alone in my kitchen, I finally understood. If someone is committed to misunderstanding you, no amount of truth will change their heart. Truth changes outcomes, not hearts. Outcomes come from boundaries, from evidence, from consequences. Hearts change only when someone wants to change, and you can't force that. I stared at my phone again, at the unread messages, and I asked myself a question I'd avoided for years. What would it look like to stop trying to win, not win the argument, not win the room, not win her approval? Just stop. It looked boring. It looked quiet. It looked like disappointing people. It looked like going to bed early instead of staying up rewriting conversations in my head. It looked like buying groceries without calculating what I might need to send next week. It looked like my nervous system finally learning the difference between love and obligation. It looked like a boundary, and boundaries aren't loud. They're repeated. They're consistent. They're not about making someone hurt. They're about making sure you don't. So I did something small. I wrote one message to my mom, just one. I didn't defend myself. I didn't attack her. I didn't mention the email. I wrote, "I won't be paying anymore. Please don't contact me about money." That was it. No explanation, no apology. My thumb hovered over the screen for a second. Then I hit send. My hands shook. My heart raced. Not because I'd done something wrong, because I'd done something new. And when my phone buzzed again, I didn't open it. I turned it face down. I stood up. I washed the one cup in my sink. I turned off the kitchen light. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself walk away without dragging someone else through the fire with me. Not because she didn't deserve consequences, because I deserved peace. And peace was going to come from distance, not destruction. The consequences didn't come all at once. They came the way weather changes out here, quietly. And then you look up and realize the light is different. The first thing that changed was the phone. My mom stopped calling like she used to. Not because she didn't want to, because I didn't answer. She tried a few times, then she switched to texts. Long ones, short ones, some angry, some sweet. I didn't respond. Silence wasn't punishment, it was a boundary. And for the first time, I held it. A week later, my dad showed up at my apartment. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets like he didn't know what to do with them. He looked older than he had at the fundraiser. I didn't know. He said, "That sentence should have felt like something, an apology, a breakthrough. It didn't. It felt late. I let him in anyway." We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd written the dates and amounts in my notebook. He looked around like he was noticing my life for the first time, the small space, the quiet, the way I kept things tidy like I was trying to prove I deserved peace. I should have asked. He said. I nodded once, because he should have. He asked me what I needed. I didn't give him a list. I didn't ask him to fix it. I just said, "I need you to handle your own marriage." That hit him harder than any accusation, because it wasn't emotional, it was practical. That's what boundaries do. They turn the problem back to the person who owns it. In town, the fundraiser didn't disappear. Nothing disappears here. People talked about it the way people talk about a storm, with fascination, with caution, with a little bit of judgment. I heard it through someone at work. "Your mom's been through so much," she said gently. And you know, people don't always understand family stuff. It was her way of telling me I'd embarrassed my mother, that I'd made the town uncomfortable. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just said, "Yeah, it was uncomfortable." And then I went back to my desk. The biggest shift wasn't what people said. It was what they stopped saying. They stopped calling my mom inspirational quite as loudly. They still pitied her. But the praise got quieter, because once doubt enters a story, it never fully leaves. My mom felt that. She started showing up at church less. She stopped volunteering at the food drive, not because she couldn't, because the room didn't feel as safe anymore. She wasn't being attacked. She just wasn't being protected. That's what happens when your image depends on someone else staying silent. And then there was me. My life didn't become perfect. I didn't suddenly feel healed. But I noticed small changes. My grocery cart got fuller. Not fancy, just normal. I filled my tank without calculating. I bought cold medicine when I needed it instead of waiting it out. One night, I fell asleep without my phone on my chest. That was new. The air in my apartment felt lighter, not because nothing hurt, because the pressure had moved. I still missed a version of my mom that might have existed. I still grieved what I didn't get. But the loop was broken. No one won completely. My mom lost the easy comfort of being admired. My dad lost the ability to pretend he didn't know. And I lost the illusion that endurance equals love, but I gained something I hadn't had in years: space. And in that space, I could finally hear my own thoughts. Not her voice, not the town's voice, mine. And that was the clearest consequence of all. If you've watched this far, I want to talk to you for a second. Not about my mom, not about my town, about you. Because I used to think my story was rare. I thought it was just my family, just my bad luck, just one complicated mess I needed to manage quietly. Then I started noticing how many people live inside the same pattern, not always with money. Sometimes it's time, sometimes it's emotional labor. Sometimes it's being the one who keeps everyone calm while you're falling apart. And the line is always the same. You're strong. You'll be fine. You can handle it. It sounds like praise, but it can be a way of stepping back. It can be a way of making you responsible for your own neglect. So if you've ever been called mature when what you really needed was protection, if you've ever been the one who pays and apologizes for paying late, if you've ever been the one who holds the family together and still gets blamed for the cracks, I need you to hear this. You're not crazy, you're not selfish, and you're not alone. A lot of people are walking around with invisible bruises because they were taught that love means endurance. That if you just try harder, explain better, sacrifice more, someone will finally see you and say, "I'm sorry." But sometimes they won't. Sometimes the apology you want isn't coming, and that doesn't mean you didn't deserve it. It means you're dealing with someone who benefits from you staying small. That's the part no one wants to say out loud. And here's the truth that finally changed my life. You don't have to destroy someone to be free. You don't have to win an argument. You don't have to expose them publicly. You don't have to prove your pain to a room full of people who weren't there for it. You can choose something quieter, a boundary, a sentence you repeat, a door you stop walking through. And yes, people might call you cold for it. They called me cold, but cold was just the word they used when I stopped being convenient. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been told you were old enough to handle what no child should have had to carry? Have you ever been praised for being strong when you were actually just alone? If that hit you, I want you to do one thing. Leave a comment. Not to explain everything, just to say, "I get it," or "I've been there," or even just a single word, because someone else is going to read it and feel less crazy. And if you're not ready to comment, that's okay too. Just remember this. Being strong doesn't mean you don't need support, and setting a boundary doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a person who wants to live. And if you're in that place right now, I'm with you.